Be'ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new set of laws. Hilchos Mechusrei Kaparah. These words literally mean the laws of those that are lacking atonement. But as we're going to see, like everything else in this book, which is the book about individual sacrifices, the more accurate translation would be the laws of the sacrifices of those who are known in the Torah as lacking atonement. And the Rambam is going to define what lacking atonement means, literally in the first halacha, but I'm just going to say it now as a way of introduction. There are many different ways in the Torah to become ritually impure. Typically, the way one rises out of ritual impurity is by going to the mikveh. And in many cases, waiting till the sunset following the immersion in the mikveh. But after that, you're pure, you go back to doing what you're doing. There are in the Torah 4 people that, even though they've completed the regular or the standard purification process, they're not yet able to partake of sacrificial meat until they themselves bring a sacrifice. That's called Mechusrei Kaparah. They're lacking atonement in the sense that their purification is over, but it's not complete until they bring a sacrifice. And the laws dictating these sacrifices are this set of laws. So as the Rambam always does, he gives us the mitzvahs that are going to be discussed here. Yesh b'chlalan arba mitzvahs aseh. Included in these laws is 4 positive mitzvahs, v'zehu pratan, and these are their details. Aleph, number 1, shetakriv hazava kishetitar karban, that a zava, a woman who experiences an irregular blood flow, when she becomes pure, she has to bring a sacrifice. Beis shetakriv hayoldis kishetitar karban, a woman who gives birth, when she becomes pure, there's a whole process of ritual impurity there. Once she becomes pure, she also brings a sacrifice. Gimel sheyakriv hazav kisheyitar karban, a man who experiences an irregular discharge from his reproductive organ, when he becomes pure, needs to bring a special sacrifice. Dalid sheyakriv mitzaira kisheyitar karban, also a person who has lesions of tsaras, the spiritual malady that would affect somebody who spoke evil, lashon hara. When he becomes pure and finishes his purification process, he also has to bring a karban. The achar sheyakrivu karban eseyen, after they bring their sacrifices, tigamer taharasan, their purity is completed. The Rabbi points to the word here, completed, as in the purification is already happened. They're already pure, but it's not complete. In contrast to saying that they're actually considered still impure till they bring their sacrifice. No, they're pure. They just haven't completed the purification till they bring the sacrifice. Ubir mitzvah selu b'prakim. The explanation of these mitzvahs is coming in the following 5 chapters, God willing. Perek Rishon, chapter 1. The Rambam now introduces the definition of the term Mechusrei Kaparah as I just explained it. Arba hema nikraim Mechusrei Kaparah. There are 4 people in the Torah that are called Mechusrei Kaparah, lacking atonement. Hazava, a woman who experiences an irregular blood flow. V'hayoldis, a birthing woman. V'hazav, a man who experiences an irregular discharge. V'hamitzaira, and a person with tsaras. Why are they called lacking atonement? Because all of these people, even though they have become pure from their impurity, and they've even gone to the mikvah, and they've even waited till sunset, they are still lacking. It's the word mechusrei. They're lacking. Their purification is not complete, insofar as in order that they can eat sacrificial meat, till they bring their sacrifice. As a matter of fact, before they bring their sacrifice, it's forbidden for them to partake of sacrificial meat, as we explained in the laws of disqualified sacrifices in the last book. And the laws relating to their sacrifices is going to be what's coming in the next couple of chapters. But first, the Rambam makes a very important distinction. There's another person in the Torah who also cannot partake of sacrificial meat until he brings a sacrifice, and we have to address why he is not included in this list. Says the Rambam Halacha Beis, Ger, Shemol, V'Tava. When you have a convert, conversion process, as we learned in the Rambam's 5th book, involves 3 steps, at least in the temple times. Circumcision, immersion in the mikveh, and bringing a special sacrifice. So says the Rambam, what if you have a convert, Shemol, V'Taval, he did the circumcision, he did the immersion, V'adayin, Lehevi Karbonek, and he still did not bring his sacrifice yet, Afal Pishahu Asr Lechel B'Kadashim, Ad Sheyavi Karbonai, even though he too is forbidden to partake of sacrificial meat till he brings his sacrifice. He is not on the list. He's not part of the category of those lacking atonement. There's a very fundamental difference between a convert and these people. The convert is on his way to become a Jew. His sacrifice is holding him back from becoming a complete convert, v'liyas kechol kshei Yisrael, and to be like any other kosher Jew. That's the reason in the case of the convert why he cannot partake of sacrificial meat. Because he hasn't yet become like a kosher Jew. But the moment that he'll bring his sacrifice and thereby become a full kosher Jew, he'll of course be able to eat sacrificial meat. In other words, there isn't anything inherently lacking in him in terms of eating sacrificial meat. He's simply not Jewish enough for that. Once he becomes Jewish enough for that, he can. Versus the people that we're going to be discussing in this set of laws are people that are already Jewish. An outside circumstance of impurity has set upon them and is not allowing them to eat their sacrificial meat. And for them, once they purified themselves, they're still lacking full atonement until they bring a sacrifice. So it's a different type of thing you're trying to accomplish. And therefore the ger doesn't go into this category. Now, once we're talking about a convert, the Rambam mentions another law related to the convert's sacrifice, and it also seems to be another distinction that the Rambam is drawing between the ger and the other Mechusrei Kaparah. And that is, hevi prida achas b'shachris. The sacrifice brought by a convert is typically either an animal or two birds. So in the case where he's bringing two birds, if he brings just one bird in the morning, he's already able to eat sacrificial meat that night. And later on he can bring the second bird. Because the sacrifice of a convert is either an animal burnt offering, or two turtle doves or two pigeons, and they're both burnt offerings, as we explained in the laws of sacrificial procedures. So that's another distinction between the convert and the Mechusrei Kaparah, that the convert has this allowance for just one out of the two birds, where the other Mechusrei Kaparah do not have that option. Now, parenthetically, this concept of a ger leads to a very interesting discussion in terms of converts nowadays. In times of the temple, the Rambam clearly seems to indicate that you cannot become a complete convert without the sacrifice. So nowadays that we don't have a sacrifice, how do we classify the converts nowadays? None of them are bringing sacrifices. So the Rogachover Goyen says that the whole idea of the sacrifice being essential is only with regard to sacrificial meat. The only consequence of bringing the sacrifice is that now you're able to eat sacrificial meat. Since nowadays we don't have sacrificial meat, so we don't care that we're missing the sacrifice. But that would imply, says the Rebbe, and it's a long, beautiful talk, that would imply that indeed we're conceding that the converts nowadays aren't full and complete converts. They're actually missing an integral piece of the puzzle, just that we don't have a temple, so they can't bring it, and it doesn't actually matter. Which is impossible, because we have many sources indicating that the converts today are complete and full and absolute converts. So the Rebbe actually suggests flipping it the other way. If you look in the Rambam doesn't say that the sacrifice makes you into a convert. He says ikvai. The sacrifice holds you back from being a full convert. In other words, you are a full convert. There's just something additional that's holding you back in temple times from allowing that fullness of the conversion to express itself, which is the sacrifice. But when you don't have the need to bring a sacrifice because there's no temple, so immediately you do become a ger gomer, you do become a complete convert upon just doing circumcision and immersion, which are really the two steps that make you a full convert. And if you remember from all the way back in the Rambam's 5th book, we explained why that is, why conversion and immersion are the integral pieces and the sacrifice is only an additional. And that has to do with the fact that the conversion and the circumcision and the immersion are what make the actual holiness of the Jew. Whereas the sacrifice is expressing a different part of the covenant between God and the Jewish people, not one that is essential to the Jew's being. And therefore, it's the circumcision and the immersion that makes you a ger gomer, a complete sacrifice, and a complete convert. And the sacrifice in times of the temple was for an additional factor, which doesn't exist nowadays, and therefore doesn't get in the way. Just an interesting concept that is elaborated upon by the Rebbe in a wonderful sikha. Now we're turning back to the Mechusrei Kaparah, the four people that are actually lacking atonement, and they are the main subject of these laws. Halacha Gimel, Hazav veHazava. The man and the woman who experience irregular discharges. So we're going to discuss some of their laws later, but the basic law is that if they only experience this sighting or this irregular discharge once or twice, they don't have to bring a sacrifice. They're still impure, but not to the level of requiring a sacrifice. Once they have 3 sightings, then they require a sacrifice. And when they become pure, they have to bring that sacrifice. What is the sacrifice? Karban kol echad mehem. The sacrifice of each of them is shtei toirim meshnei b'nei yoina, 2 birds. You can see the woman here, she's a zava, holding 2 birds, echad oila ve'echad chatas, 2 pigeons, 2 turtle doves, whichever one she chooses. One is brought as a burnt offering, one is brought as a sin offering. V'hayoldes, and a woman who gives birth, karbana, when she becomes pure, her sacrifice is keves oila uben yoina itoyer chatas, 1 sheep as a burnt offering, and 1 bird, either a turtle dove or a pigeon, as a sin offering. Being ein yada maseges, Torah clearly says if her hand cannot afford it, she doesn't have the money for an animal, she can bring 2 birds, either turtle doves or pigeons, like the zava, echad oila ve'echad chatas, 1 burnt offering, 1 sin offering. Ve'hamitzaira, and the person who has tsaras lesions and goes through his purification process, after which he must bring a sacrifice, karbanoi shleisha kvasim. His sacrifice is 3 sheep. And actually, it's 2 male sheep and 1 female sheep. Echad oila ve'echad asham. 2 male sheep are 1 burnt offering, 1 guilt offering. The kisba lechatas, and a female sheep for a sin offering. If he cannot afford it, Torah also allows him a little leeway. Maybe he can. He brings 1 pair of birds instead of 2 of the animals. Echad oila ve'echad chatas. 1 burnt offering, 1 sin offering. V'keves la'asham. But the animal, the sheep for the guilt offering, must remain. Halacha dalid. Some general rules. Hazav ve'hazava ve'hamitzaira. The man and the woman with the irregular discharge and the tsaras lesions guy, mayvi kol echad mishlashtam kaparasai bayem hashmini letaharasai. Each of these 3 bring their sacrifice on the 8th day of their purification process. Which means, shekal echad mehem sefer shiva yemei tara. Each of them needs to count 7 days of purity, 7 days of being clean, in the case of the zav and the zava, of no sightings. In the case of the mitzayra, it's after the kohen sees that the lesion has healed. He also begins a count of 7 days. V'toivel bayem hashvi. All 3 of them have to go to the mikvah on the 7th day. Umariv shimshay, wait till sunset. Umakriv karbanesa bayem hashmini, and they bring their sacrifices the next day. Halacha hey, however, hayoldis, the woman who gives birth, has a bit of a different law, because let's take a look for a second at the passage. This is almost a full chapter of the Torah which is dedicated to the laws of childbirth, and it says essentially, we'll just read some of the verses here. Isha kisazriya v'yolda zachar. If a woman gives birth to a male, v'tama shivas yamim, kimei nidas dvaisa titma. She has 7 days of impurity, which is considered like a menstruating woman. And then ushleishim yayim ushleishas yamim teished bidmei tara. Then she has 33 days where she is considered to be completely clean in terms of any blood that she sees is considered pure, but it isn't a time where she can become out of the state of being considered a birthing woman. She has to wait those 33 days. She still cannot eat any sacrificial meat. So she can't touch sacrificial meat until the days are over, which is day 40, right? Because for a boy, you have 7 days of impurity and then 33 days of waiting. If it's a girl, the Torah says, everything is doubled. 2 weeks first of impurity, and then for 66 days, she says almost called clean blood, but again, she still cannot partake of sacrificial meat. Then the Torah says, when the days of her purity are complete, both for a son or a daughter. In the case of the son, that's 40 days after birth. In the case of a daughter, that's 80 days after birth, she brings her sacrifices. So now knowing this, the Rambam clarifies like this. Hayoldas, a woman who gives birth, she does not bring her sacrifice on the 40th day for a male or on the 80th day after birthing a female. Even though Torah seems to imply that. At the conclusion of the days of the purity. Conclusion would sound like the last day, 40th day or 80th day. No. She must wait till the sun sets on that 40th or 80th day. And she brings her sacrifice the next day. That's day 41 for a male, day 81 for a female. That's the day about which it says, that on the conclusion of the days of her purity for a son or a daughter, she should bring. Meaning, milois, conclusion means after the conclusion. You have to wait till the 40 or 80 days are full and complete, and then on the 41st or 81st day, she brings a sacrifice. So much so that if she brings her sacrifice during what's called Yemei Melois, during those days before they've been completed, lo yatzas, she has not fulfilled her obligation. Afilu hevia al vlades harishainim. Even if she brings a sacrifice for a previous baby, during the counting days for a second, later baby, lo yatzas, she hasn't fulfilled that obligation. Because the woman needs to wait till she's out of any form of counting for any baby before she brings a sacrifice for any baby. Now, whether we're talking about the first three or the birthing woman, this is a general law now. For all the Mechusrei Kaparah, Avru Yamim Elu V'leheviu Kaparah, if their days passed and they didn't bring the sacrifice on the 8th day or on the 41st day or the 81st day, whatever case it is, Hare Elu Makrivim Kaparah La'achar Zman. It's not a mischance. They can bring their sacrifice after some time, whenever they can. But know that b'chol zman shelehiv krivu chatasam asurim le'achal b'kadashim. As long as they didn't bring their sin offering, they're forbidden to eat sacrificial meat. Aval ha'oila v'ha'asham einon ma'akvin. But the burnt offering and the guilt offering, in the case of the one who has to bring it, those aren't essential to eating sacrificial meat. Just the sin offering element of their offering is what holds them back from eating sacrificial meat. Says the Rambam, we've already explained in the laws of sacrificial procedures, anybody who needs to bring a sacrifice, you can't bring it for them unless they consent, unless they're aware. Except for a fascinating law, these four people. The Mechusrei Kaparah she'ein tzrichin das bailim. They don't require the knowledge of the owner. You can bring a sacrifice for them and let them know, hey, by the way, I took care of you. How do we know this? Because we know that a person can bring a sacrifice on behalf of his young children if they were Mechusrei Kaparah. Let's say they became a zava, or whatever it was, or a mitzayra, and then he can feed them sacrificial meat. So if you have the power to bring it for your kids, that tells you that you can bring it for anybody without their consent. Halacha Vav, now we return to define some of these people's core definition. What makes you into a zav? What makes you into a zava, etc. We begin with the zava. Ezu hi zava. What is called a zava? Zu shezav dama, shloisha yamim ze achar ze, beloy es nidasa. Torah clearly says, a zava means a woman who had 3 days consecutively of irregular blood flow, not during her menstruation period. The zu hi zava gedela, that's called the great zava, who requires 7 clean days and is obligated to bring a sacrifice. Because this is in contrast to what's called the Zava Ketana. A woman who only has 1 day of sighting or 2 days of sighting is a lesser level of Zava as long as she experiences 1 clean day, called Sheneres Yoim Keneged Yoim. We actually had her mentioned a couple days ago in the laws of the inadvertent transgressions. So then there's no sacrifice required. But a Zava Gedola who has 3 days of sighting, she has to wait 7 clean days and then bring a sacrifice. Now, says the Rambam, I'm only going to go with this general definition. We're not getting into the specifics. That was already covered in detail in the 5th book. Ukvar be'arnu be'inyan hanida. We already explained when it came to the topic of nida, talking about forbidden relationships with a menstruating woman, we already explained all the different types of blood flows. Masai. When a woman becomes what's called a zava, irregular blood flow by seeing blood, when she will not be classified as a zava, when she'll be classified as a menstruating woman, or some cases she'll see blood and she'll be totally pure, and when she has to be a doubtful zava. We already covered all the specifics, not getting into it now. Just know that kol makom she'amarnu shehi zava v'seferes shiva, any place or any case where we said that a woman becomes a zava and is required to count 7 clean days, she's liable to bring a sacrifice and the sin offering is eaten by the kohanim. V'chol makom she'amarnu shehi fake zava, any case where we said the woman is a doubtful zava, she'll bring the sacrifice but the sin offering will not be eaten, because we already explained, whenever you bring a bird sin offering out of doubt, it's always burnt. B'sham beyarnu, talking about what we covered in those laws, we already explained over there also definitions of birthing woman. What a woman has to give birth to, or at least miscarry, to make her impure on account of birth. Or what she can give birth to or miscarry, and it won't make her impure on account of birth. And again, we're not getting into the specifics, but just remember, any case where we made a woman ritually impure on account of birth, she must bring a sacrifice and the sin offering will be eaten. And if a woman was classified as not being impure for birth, that means she didn't really give birth according to the Torah, and therefore she's exempt from bringing any sacrifice at all, even though she may be impure for other reasons, but not on account of birth. And therefore, no birthing woman sacrifice. Let's say you have a woman who isn't yet sure whether she's pregnant. Early on. It's not 3 months in, let's say. And then she miscarries something. But she doesn't know what she miscarried. Maybe it's a full stillborn fetus that you would be liable to sacrifice, or it's not. It was just an entity that's not going to obligate you to bring a sacrifice, as we explained in detail in those chapters in the 5th book. She is called a doubtful birthing woman, where she'll bring a sacrifice, but it will not be eaten. The sin offering will not be eaten, like the case of doubt of Zava in the last halacha. Where if you have two women who both miscarried, upon examination it's revealed that one fetus requires a sacrifice, the other fetus does not, and we don't know. Neither one recognizes her stillborn. Each one will have to bring a sacrifice out of doubt, but neither one can be eaten, the sin offering. Because every time you bring a burnt a sin offering, bird, at a doubt, you don't eat it. Shema ina chayeves, because maybe they weren't obligated to bring it. The name says chatazu chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, which makes the sin offering into mundane entities that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard, she'em asurin bahana kameshivarnu bilchis shchita, which are forbidden to have benefit from them, as we explained in the laws of ritual slaughter. Halacha ches achas hayoldis, va'achas hamapeles, vlad echad oy vlades harbe. Technically, it doesn't matter how much you give birth to. Whether a woman births or miscarries one baby or multiple babies, she brings one sacrifice for them all. In other words, twins, triplets, one sacrifice covers everything. So long as she expels them or she births them all during what's called the Yemei Melois, during the first 40 or 80 days. Let's say a woman gave birth, and then 40 days later if it was a male, or 80 days later if it was a female, she then miscarries another fetus, she's now required to bring a second sacrifice for the second stillborn. Ketzat. Let's visualize this in more concrete terms. Yolda nekeva. A woman gives birth to a healthy, viable female. Kol nefalim shetapil. Miyayim haleida ad sof yom shmeinim. Any stillborn accompanying fetus that she will miscarry from that day till 80 days after the birth of the female, they are considered to be together with the first baby. It's as if she gave birth to twins, one after another. She only brings one sacrifice. But if she would miscarry a fetus after day 81, from day 81 and day 81 and further, if whatever she miscarried requires her to bring a sacrifice, she must bring it on its own. It cannot be under the umbrella of the first baby. Yolda Nikeva. Let's go even further now. Let's stretch it. She gave birth to a female. So we said she has 80 days now of clear. Any more fetuses that are miscarried here are counted with the first. So let's consider this case. After 60 or 70 days, she miscarries a second female. So we know now that second female is included with the first. But now, the window opens up again. Any fetus which shall further miscarry within 80 days of the second female, she's exempt from bringing a sacrifice for it. If she miscarries a third fetus within 60 or 70 days of the second fetus, any further fetus, a fourth one, which shall miscarry during the 80-day window frame from after the third fetus, shall be exempt from it also. Because the fourth is counted with the third. The third is counted with the second, because it's within its time frame of 80 days. And the second one is counted with the first. And she only brings one sacrifice for everything. So in other words, the rule that we're saying that you have 80 days to be covered extends per fetus. And if they can all be traced back within 80 days of each other, one sacrifice covers them all. Halacha tes hayeledas tumtum androgynes. If a woman gives birth to a tumtum, a baby whose genitalia is covered, you don't know if it's a male or a female, or a hermaphrodite. So we have to go stringently, and we have to assume it's a male, which means she only has 40 days of being in the clear. And if she miscarries a fetus after the 40 days, she has to bring a sacrifice for this new fetus. Maybe it was a male, the first baby, which makes her miscarrying now after the time frame is over. But you cannot eat the sin offering. Maybe it was a female, the first tumtum. Which means she now miscarried the second fetus during the time frame of 80 days. Which she is exempt from the second sacrifice. So you have to go on both sides. You bring the sacrifice, but you don't eat it. Halacha Yud, ha'isha sheyesh aleha sveik chamesh leidos, or sveik chamesh zivos. Let's say you have a woman who experienced 5 things which could be considered a doubtful birth, or 5 sightings which could be considered a doubtful zava. Mevia karban echad va'ichelas bizvachim. She just brings 1 sacrifice, and she could already eat sacrificial meat. The others aren't even an obligation for her, because we're not going to take the chance of doing the sacrificial procedure for a bird, which involves malika, where you may be doing malika for something that's mundane in the temple courtyards. Once you did 1 for all the 5 doubts, it covers you. But if she had 5 experiences of definite births, or 5 experiences of definite zavas, mevia karban echad, so she can still bring just 1 sacrifice, va'ichelas bizvachim, and already eat sacrificial meat. However, the others remain an obligation upon her. She must make up the other 4 sacrifices. Same thing for a zav, a man who experiences an irregular discharge. What if she has 5 certain and 5 doubtful births? Or 5 definite births and 5 doubtful zavas. She has to bring 2 sacrifices to cover each category of definite and doubt. 1 for the definite experience, which is eaten like a regular sacrifice. And all the other definite ones are still obligatory upon her. The other one is for the doubt. It's not eaten. The other ones aren't obligatory for her. And after bringing those 2 sacrifices, she can immediately go and eat sacrificial meat. Let's say a woman goes through conversion. So for conversion, she has her own issues of bringing a sacrifice, etc. But now she's dealing with a birth. It's not known whether she gave birth before or after she went through the conversion. Not sure exactly how that happens, but let's say she was going through the conversion process and then she realizes that she experienced a miscarriage, but she doesn't know when exactly the miscarriage happened. Same thing, she's out of doubt that maybe she was already Jewish. She has to bring a sacrifice, but we won't eat the sin offering. Talking about doubts, we already explained in the laws of inadvertent transgressions, the last set of laws, that anybody who is in doubt whether they still lack atonement after bringing a sacrifice, and Yom Kippur passes, even though Yom Kippur serves as some kind of cleansing, forgiveness day for many people, these people still have to bring their sacrifice even after Yom Kippur, because this sacrifice is what's allowing them to eat sacrificial meat. If you don't bring it, you still can't eat the meat. So you got to bring it even after Yom Kippur. Halacha Yud Beis, ha'isha sheyesh aleha leida eziva. Interesting halacha. We remember that there used to be in the temple 13 boxes, donation boxes, that were used, some for leftovers of different offerings, and some of them, the one that's relevant to us, was for pairs of birds. People who needed to bring pairs of birds, they would drop money in the box, and the Kohanim who were serving that day would open up the box, purchase pairs of birds, and bring it on behalf of whoever it needed to be brought on behalf of. So talking about eating sacrificial meat, says the Rambam, an interesting law. A woman who had an obligation to bring a sacrifice for a birth or for a ziva, she can bring the money, the worth of the pair of birds, put it in the box that it belongs to, and assume that it was offered and she can eat sacrificial meat that night. Because there's a presumption that the court of Kohanim would not leave the temple premises until all the money was used up in the box and the pairs of birds were offered at their worth. As we explained twice actually in the Rambam's 3rd book, in the laws of the half shekel coins, and in the Rambam's 8th book, the last book, the laws of those working in the temple. Yud Gimel, if a woman had a obligatory offering for birth or for irregular discharge, and she brought her sin offering, because there's always two parts to the offering, burnt and sin. So she brought the sin offering, then she dies, tragically. Her heirs still have to bring the burnt offering. Even if she didn't designate it while she was alive. She didn't even put anything aside. Her property is already on lien to bring the second sacrifice. The hashibud din tairahu, and the idea of lien is a biblical law. So the biblical law is holding an obligation on her estate. So even if she didn't put aside an animal, we have to go into the estate and the heirs have to bring her second offering, her burnt offering.